Senator Bernie Sanders says he's staying in the race for president despite Joe Biden taking a commanding lead in the Democratic race for the White House. The former vice president picked up a string of wins last night, including one in a key battleground state, and those victories are propelling him into the clear front-runner position. Biden won 4 of the 6 states that voted on Tuesday, and that includes Michigan, where 125 delegates were up for grabs. Bernie Sanders won that state just 4 years ago. The Vermont senator did also win in North Dakota, while Washington remains a toss-up. Here's what Bernie Sanders had to say about his performance last night.
Last night, obviously, was not a good night for our campaign from a delegate point of view. We lost in the largest state up for grabs yesterday, the state of Michigan. We lost in Mississippi, Missouri, and Idaho. On the other hand, we won in North Dakota, and we lead the vote count in the state of Washington, the second largest state, contested yesterday.
Well, Biden maintains a significant delegate lead, narrowing the path to victory for his rivals. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe reports.
It looks like we're going to have another good night.
Addressing staff in Philadelphia last night, Joe Biden said that going forward, his campaign is about party unity.
And I want to thank Bernie Sanders and his supporters for their tireless energy and their passion. We share a common goal, and together we'll defeat Donald Trump.
Biden was lifted by high voter turnout in Michigan, where nearly 1 million people voted absentee, almost twice as many as in 2016. The former vice president claimed victories yet again with the backing of African-American voters, but also thanks to white voters and labor union members. Earlier in the day, touring an auto plant in Detroit, Biden had a testy exchange with a voter over gun rights.
And you are actively trying to limit your Second Amendment right and take away from it.
Now, shush. Shush. I support the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, just like right now, if you yell fire, that's not free speech. But from the very beginning, I have a shotgun, I have a 20 gauge, a 12 gauge, my son's hunt. Guess what? You're not allowed to own any weapons. I'm not taking your gun away at all. You need 100 rounds.
So when you were in Veto, when you said you're going to take our guns,
I did not say that. That's not true. I did not say that.
Video.
It's a viral video like the other ones they're putting out that are simply a lie.
Biden went on to say that he proposed taking away semi-automatic weapons. Also, for the first time, both the Biden and Sanders campaigns called off planned rallies in Ohio because of the coronavirus.
Whenever we do rallies, we consult with public health officials, because the last thing in the world we will ever want to do is put anybody in danger.
For more on this, I want to bring in Catilin Huey-Burns and Antjuan Seawright. Catilin's our CBSN political reporter. Antjuan's a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Catilin, to you first. We just heard from Bernie Sanders. He admitted he doesn't have the pathway for these delegates, for the delegate count that's needed. Why do you think he continues to stay in?
Yeah, the big headline coming out of that was Bernie Sanders acknowledging that his campaign is losing the electability argument. This race is all about delegates. You have to get over 1,900 of them to get the nomination. That's what this race is about. And we're seeing in the exit polling that voters time and time again in all of these states that have had contests have said that defeating Donald Trump is their #1 priority, especially last night in Michigan, their #1 priority over policy issues. So the writing or the math is really on the wall for the Sanders campaign, and he seemed to acknowledge that. However, he's also seeming to try to push Joe Biden on the issues. Remember, Bernie Sanders has a loyal following. He has a loyal base. This is not a campaign that we could expect him to give up easily. And just now, I think you heard him trying to offer Joe Biden something of a roadmap for the future. Said he's looking forward to debating him, but he wasn't really going after him personally. He kept saying, Joe, what are you going to do on medical debt, on student debt, on climate, on immigration? Kind of providing something for Joe Biden to think about as he looks like he's headed towards the nomination.
Antjuan, I want to ask you, we saw in South Carolina on Super Tuesday, Biden winning big overwhelmingly with black voters. You kept telling us from the start of the year, watch South Carolina, Biden's going to do better. Even when Biden was down, you kept saying that over and over again. But at some point, how does he reach out to these folks who are on the progressive wing of this party? We say this is a big tent party, but how do you divide, how do you heal that rift, I guess is my question.
Well, you know, Rena, in the AME church, we learned it takes a village to raise a child. I've transferred that to my political life and said it takes a village to win elections. Therefore, I still believe Bernie Sanders and every other presidential candidate who's no longer with us have a tremendous role to play in terms of bridging this party back together, healing this party, and most importantly, taking on Donald Trump and locking into their strengths within this party. There's no doubt in my mind we cannot be successful without Bernie Sanders and his loyal supporters coming in to support the nominee if it's not him in November. And I think that's so important for Democrats to keep in perspective. We're not in the business of bashing each other. We're in the business of running for our party's nomination. And no matter what disagreements we may appear to have amongst each other on the policy, they do not compare to the differences we have with Donald Trump and the reckless agenda of the Republican Party.
Is there a sense, Catilin, of what Bernie Sanders wants to achieve now? I mean, there's really no point. He acknowledged the delegate count, right? There's really no point to sort of re-rack this and give him an upper leg in any of the contests coming up.
It's very difficult because you look at his turnout in Michigan last night. He lost every single county to Joe Biden. Remember, Michigan was a place that kind of represented areas where Bernie Sanders did well in 2016 and had a base of support. What we saw last night, I think, tells the story of the election right now and moving forward into next week's contests, which are Florida, Ohio. Very difficult for Bernie Sanders to win over if he didn't do well in Michigan last night. And what we saw was Joe Biden building the coalition that Democrats say is necessary to secure the nomination this time around. That means winning overwhelming support among black voters. It also means increased turnout in the suburbs. We saw that last night in Michigan. These are areas where Democrats did well in 2018 across the country, turnout among suburban women especially. And we saw Joe Biden make inroads among the constituencies that Bernie Sanders had done well in before. That means white voters, white men, and white voters without a college degree. Joe Biden won them all in Michigan, or led Bernie Sanders in Michigan on those measures, making it very difficult for Bernie Sanders to be able to make the case in places like Ohio next week.
Antjuan, I want to let you weigh in.
Yeah, I think Catilin did a great job of flirting with some of the results from last night. But here was the deeper point about last night. In every state that took place, we've seen turnout increase from at least a 20% perspective. In some places, it was double and quadruple. That is a great sign for Democrats setting themselves up for a very important 2020 general election. We saw Joe Biden win back rural white voters in Michigan. That is a place where Donald Trump had successful with those voters. So what that tells me is that these people who voted for Donald Trump in 16 realized they made a mistake, came on board in 18. Now they feel really good about the Democratic possibility. And for 2020, same thing was true in Mississippi. He did not just win African-American voters. While that's an important narrative to tell, he won rural white voters in Mississippi. All that matters when you have to put together a diverse coalition that does not look like necessarily the Clinton coalition of 92 and 96, or even does not look like the Obama coalition of 2008 and 2012, or the 18 coalition that Democrats won in the midterms. It will be a totally different coalition, and I'm excited about the enthusiasm we've seen in this turnout process.
Enthusiasm is so important, and we still got a bunch more primaries down the road over the next month or so. I want to ask both of you, first off, is it too early, VP talk? Any names floating around at all?
Oh, I think there are a number of names floating around, and I think it would be political malpractice for some of these conversations not to be had at this point. Look, we know African-American women are what I describe as the political booster cables of this party, so I think those conversations are being flirted with. I also think that Hispanic voters will play a tremendous role, and it will be, again, a function of malpractice if there are not some names being discussed or vetted.
What are you hearing? Stacey Abrams? Are you hinting at Stacey Abrams? Or?
Well, you know, I sometimes hear Catilin Huey-Burns, so who knows? There are a lot of names being,
That's a first.
being talked about.
I think it's important also to listen to what Bernie Sanders was saying in his message just now, which is that you cannot win future elections without the future of the party, in his words. And Bernie Sanders, while he hasn't increased the turnout that he said that he would in this election, he is getting young voters overwhelmingly compared to Joe Biden. And I think his message to the Biden campaign is that you do need to do better among younger voters, the Democratic Party at large. If you're trying to rebuild kind of the Obama coalition, Joe Biden has been able to do some of that, but targeting younger voters is going to be a real challenge, getting them to actually register to vote, getting them to turn out, getting them inspired by a campaign. That is kind of the road work ahead.
Caitlin, you're 100% right, and that's why Bernie Sanders will play a tremendous role in the general election. But also, I think the Democratic Party as a whole, not just the top of the ticket, but other elements of the ticket, have to make prioritizing youth voters a top priority and not just a priority. So that means making the message connect the dots so they will have a reason to turn out. It's one thing to engage, it's another thing to persuade in political campaigns. And I think we've done a hell of a job engaging all type of voters, but we have not necessarily persuaded them to come on board and cast a vote for Democrats in the general election. And I think that's one area in which we have to do well going into November.
All right, Antjuan Seawright, Catilin Huey-Burns, thank you both.